Hey, fifth grade. Today we're going to be reading Potterwookie chapter 11, and this chapter is called The Graveyards. At 8 o'clock on the dot, the doorbell rang. I was sitting at my beanbag, reading and pretending to be studious. Harry was already in my backpack, along with the other supplies I would need. I heard my mom get the front door, and I continued to act like I was reading. I was nervous about tonight, but I knew we needed to stop Wilt once and for all. A few moments later, my mom came into my room. Trevor's here. Really? What a surprise. He said you're supposed to finish a school project. Oh, yeah, that moon thing. I totally forgot. The first part of our plan was genius and fail-proof. Trevor knew that there was going to be a full moon tonight, so he had told my mom that we needed to study it and write a report. I pretended like I didn't want to go, and that was all my mom needed to insist that I had to. She loves making me do homework. You go out and stare at the moon with Trevor. Yes, Mom. I threw on my backpack and walked quickly to the front door. Trevor was standing on the sidewalk with a small telescope and a science book. I was happy to see that someone had fixed his regular glasses. They were still crooked on him, but at least he looked normal again. Ready? There's his friend Trevor. Once we were out in the front yard, Trevor whistled, and the rest of our friends popped up from behind the bushes. We were all supposed to bring something we could use to protect ourselves. Jack had his assault flashlight. Teddy had a soap on a rope that he was swinging around like a mace. Aaron had a fly swatter, and Rourke was wearing gloves that he thought gave him a super grip. Trevor's weapons Trevor's weapon was the pair of steel-toed boots he had borrowed from his dad. Me? I had my Nerf crossbow. Altogether, we made a pretty impressive team. Here's all of his silly friends, ready to go encounter Wilt. The full moon was so big it looked like we could reach out and touch it. Its lights made it very easy to see things. Harry growled softly in my backpack, and Jack thought it was me. What was that? Just my stomach. You should eat more. Rourke was an expert on eating, but all six of us began to run to Timon Cemetery. Rourke's love of eating seemed to be having a negative effect on him. Slow down, I'm gonna hurl. Rourke kept begging us to slow down. By the time we got to the cemetery, he was so far behind, none of us could see him. Do you think he's still coming? Last I heard him, he was screaming something about intestinal cramps. After a few minutes, he caught up, limping and breathing wildly. We all had to wait for him to calm down before we could continue. The main gate to Taman City Cemetery was locked, forcing us to climb over the ivy-covered wall. Once inside the wall, all of us pulled out bathrobes from our backpacks and put them as disguises. Really? So, somehow this is part of their plan. I had borrowed my dad's robe, but Teddy had borrowed his mom's, and Jack seemed to be wearing his grandma's. Trevor's robe was normal, but Aaron's was a big thermal thing with a long zipper down the front, and Rourke was wearing a huge t-shirt pulled up over his heads. We walked carefully to the clearing and the single tall tree. We then reached into our backpacks and pulled out bed sheets. All of us had brought plain sheets, except for Jack. Whose are those? You don't have a sister. It's a boy show, too. So, something about tickled travelers on his sheets. Trevor tied the sheets together using a knot he had learned in Scouts. We then stretched them out across the clearing. Jack held one end while Trevor held the other. So, you could see their plan right here. So they have one sheet operator, they call it, and another one there, and then Wilt is supposed to stand in the middle, and then somehow they're supposed to get him in this tree. The rest of us moved into different places to wait for our parts. Once I was alone, I took off my backpack and unzipped it. Harry crawled out and shook. He still smelled like mint, and he was smiling. He seemed pretty taken with my bathrobe. Thanks, I'm glad you think it's slimming, so do you think you can make the sheet fly? So we'll see where Harry comes into this plan. I pulled out the extra sheet I had packed and laid it on the ground. Harry pointed his wand and then said a few words. The end of his wand glowed slightly, and the sheet began to rise. Perfect. Wingardium up. The sheet hovered like a magic carpet for a few seconds, before Harry let it drop softly to the ground. We then crouched low and waited for Rourke to blow the duck call. The night was full of strange noises, and the headstones made it seem like at any moment zombies could show up. There were falling stars dropping from the sky. I'm going down. It seemed like forever before I heard rustling in the trees and saw Wilt step out into the clearing. He was alone, with no sign of my bike. Wilt walked to the middle of the clearing and stood in front of the full moon and near the single tree. He leaned his head back and called my name. Rourke blew his duck call, and instantly Trevor and Teddy pulled the rope of sheets up. They ran toward and around Will as Aaron and Rourke made unsettling ghost noises. Will was so surprised he just stood there. In a couple of seconds, he was wrapped up to the tree. So it looks like their plan is working well so far. I looked up at Harry and nodded. It was time for him to do his stuff. He pushed back his small sleeve and waved his wands. After chanting a few words, he levitated the sheets, and it floated up and out of the trees. It flitted toward Wilt like a hovering ghost and draped over his heads. I think somebody needs a hug. So he's all wrapped up, and then Harry put a sheet on top of him. Harry climbed into my backpack, and I nervously stepped out of the trees and over to Wilt's. I stood in front of him, and in my deepest dad-sounding voice asked, "Son, where's my boy's bike?" Wilt started to apologize for a bunch of things he had done. He listed people he had pestered and stuff he had broken. I wasn't surprised by all the things he was saying, but I really just wanted my bike back. I asked him again where it was, and he mumbled, "It's in the maintenance shop next to my house." Still using my dad voice, I told my friends what to do. "Hold him here, fellow dads." They all answered back in their best grown-up voices, "Okay, sure, yes, you betcha. I'm a businessman." So all of them, I guess, are pretending to be dads right now, which is pretty silly. I waved for Trevor to come with me, and the two of us raced through the trees and tombstones toward the back of the graveyard. The full moon was in front of us, and there were shooting stars flying through the sky. This reminds me of the book I'm reading. Then you should know how this ends. There you go. The maintenance shop sat right next to Wilt's house. It was big and square with a small front door. I jiggled the knob, but it was locked. Looking up, I saw a small window above the door. I pressed my face against the glass while Trevor shined a flashlight. There inside, leaning against the wall, was my bike. I took off my backpack and unzipped it. Harry popped out. Trevor was surprised to see him. So there's the little warehouse and then his bike. So, that's who made that sheet fly? And Harry looks pretty proud of himself. I put my backpack on and hoisted Harry up. Harry pushed the top window and it creaked open. He pushed it some more and then began to crawl in. Drop down and unlock the door. So somehow they're going to get Harry to do this. Harry slipped all the way in and dropped down to the floor. Trevor and I could see him jump up and grab the inside handle. The door popped open and we rushed in. Trevor flipped the flashlight back on, and I yanked the handlebars and flipped the bike around. I was wheeling it out the door when a porch light went on at Wilt's house, and there was a sound of someone yelling madly. My heart withered like a weed. And that is the end of chapter 11. So I'm excited to see what happens in the next chapter and if they get caught. So please make sure you answer your chapter 11 questions, and I'll be back in the next video with chapter 12. Bye!